You brought up Gen Z in an email to me. Who are those people, and what do you make of them?
When you look at the Zoomers and different inclinations, the expressions of certain loves that they're having, there are trends that pop up on social media. The trend of the trad life and the trad wife, that's kind of the new ideal. The trend of orthodoxy in religion, the resurgence of the traditional Latin Mass, specifically among younger people. And I attend the traditional Latin Mass, smells and bells and mantillas and all the rest of it. And I think, why is that happening? And for Gen Z, which was raised without much religion for pretty much the first time in American history, people openly saying, we're not religious. The nuns are the great religious group now. We have we don't really believe in anything. Raised to be told that they should just prioritize their own individual desires. Raised to believe that liberty is just doing whatever you wish, not the right to do what you ought. Left to its own devices, what is Gen Z rediscovering? The eternal questions and very good answers to the eternal questions.
Welcome, Michael Knowles.
Dr. Arnn, thank you so much for having me. Longtime fan, first-time caller. Great honor to be on the show.
Yeah. Well, you're a rage around here at Hillsdale College. We have a lot of Catholic kids, and they, and not only they, just won't shut up about you. It becomes annoying. And you disappointed us in an invitation this year, which we won't mention what it is, but that will probably come to you again. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I would be most honored by that. I was quite troubled. We won't mention what the invitation was, but I was really looking for an excuse to get up to Hillsdale. And unfortunately, I was doing a speaking event that day. But I was able to visit Hillsdale one time. You mentioned the Catholic kids. I'm walking around campus. I think I was going to buy a bagel or something. And someone stops me and says, hey, Michael, big fan of the show, whatever, we're chatting. So I start to have a conversation with this guy. And he says, Michael, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I got to go. I said, oh, that's fine. What, you have to run to class or something? It's a Tuesday morning. He says, no, I've got to get to daily mass. I said, I think this is the only college campus, so it's one of the only ones in America where a student would give that excuse. Very impressive.
Yeah, I got to get to it. Well, we're nerdy in our own way here. We're very Christian. Mere Christianity is our official doctrine. I know you're a big Roman Catholic guy, but and that's okay by me.
I'm relieved. Lewis, actually, that book, when I was at my very liberal alma mater, I came across Mere Christianity, and I was agnostic, atheist for years and years, and someone handed it to me. I took it not because I was inclined to believe in Christianity, but because I'm frugal and I can't turn down a free book. So I said, all right, I'll give it a read. Why not? And that book played as much a role as just about anything in my reversion to Christianity.
So let's put your story. So first of all, I'll just say about you that this guy turns out to be, you can't tell it when you first hear about him, he's actually learned and bookish and very involved in strange arguments that are pretty good at them, I think. But then on the surface, he's satirical, combative. He sells cigars, his own brand, Mayflower. And what else? There are other strange things about you. So one thing I want to discover in our time here is, how did you come to be? How'd you grow up? Where'd you grow up? How'd you get to Yale? All that.
Well, when my mother and father got to meet each other, I was a glint in my father's eye, I guess. But I was raised in New York. Not far from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as it so happens. So we took slightly different paths, but I grew up in suburban New York. I would go grocery shopping in the Bronx, where Miss Ocasio-Cortez pretends to have been raised. And that's one of the places I first discovered my love of cigars, which has now become a side project of mine. I say I'm a cigar salesman who happens to work in media and politics. But I ended up at Yale. I didn't have any family connection really to the place, but I liked that Yale was known for politics. A lot of politicians came out of there, and also a lot of people in the arts and in theater, and I liked both of those things. So I thought, all right, that's as good a place as any to go. And I was always a little bit conservative. I was probably born with parted hair, smoking a cigar. But I would have called myself more libertarian, or I don't know. I'd try to be a little more appealing to the left as a teenager. So I go there. And the thing about a really left-wing school like Yale is that most people who go just become more liberal. They go with the current. It brings them along, and they go work for McKinsey or something like that. I was in the minority where I became radicalized, I guess. I became much more conservative when I was there. I gave up my libertarian leanings. I became much more traditionalist. I gave up my atheism and agnosticism. I became much more Christian. And there were a handful of us there. And it was something I noticed. A lot of my classmates were smarter than me and had read more books than I had, and they were very impressive. And most people were atheists. But the smartest people, I noticed, believed in God. And there were some Jews who were very intelligent, very well-read, and a lot of Christians. And so, despite Yale's best efforts, I don't know, I graduated there more right-wing and more religious than I came in by a long shot.
And did you have a teacher who had a particular impact on you?
Yeah, there were a number of great teachers there. Ton of bad teachers, but a number of really good ones. Giuseppe Mazzotta, the Dante scholar, was really instrumental in my thinking. Some of the more conservative professors, John Gaddis, Don Kagan, certainly Charlie Hill, a number of others, wonderful teachers throughout a number of different departments. Stephen Smith, who's a little bit more left-wing, Straussian, really wonderful guy. He was I
had dinner with him one time.
A marvelous man, and he was the faculty advisor to my cigar club, the Society for Intellectual Growth and Reinvigoration, which was just a scheme to get the university to pay for my habit. But so there were good teachers there, but it was a lot of the students really helped mold my thinking and on really profound questions to set me up such that after I graduated, I would have the opportunity to get the education that I neglected or that was sort of left by the wayside when I was actually paying tuition.
Yeah, I studied with a man named Harry Jaffa, as you probably know, and
I've heard of him once or twice, I think.
He too is a Yale graduate, studied literature there, and we had dinner, Professor Jaffa and I, with Stephen Smith, and Professor Jaffa couldn't get over the fact that a Jew had become master of a college at Yale. And of course, that's to me an introduction to a world that I never saw. Like, why would it be controversial for a Jew? Well, Professor Jaffa grew up when it was. And I can't say that I found Professor Smith's opinions congenial, but...
Well, the problem that I've always had with our Straussian friends, and I was educated in no small part by Straussians. One of my summer fellowships was with the Hertog Foundation, and back when it was taught out of the Hudson Institute, and I was a Claremont Fellow, Lincoln Fellow. So I loved Strauss. Senior year, one of my senior theses was a translation of a Machiavelli play, and it was this play that was initially written by Menander. We lost the original. Then Terence did a version of it in Latin, and then Machiavelli did a version, I think actually maybe two versions of it in Italian, and it had never been translated for the English stage. So the department said, you're going to do a senior thesis, but you can do this, and you can put it on afterward. So I read Strauss on Machiavelli. And you think it's hard to read Machiavelli. Reading Strauss on Machiavelli, your head is spinning. I had a meeting with Professor Smith, and I said, okay, I think I'm starting to get a handle on what Strauss is saying about Machiavelli, because he says X, Y, and Z, and he says that only a mischievous reader could conclude ABC. So I think it's X, Y, Z, not ABC. And Professor Smith has a little smile, and he says, well, Michael, would you perhaps describe Leo Strauss as a mischievous reader? And I said, okay, I give up. I have no idea what he's writing here. So I signed it off.
That book of Strauss's is particularly mischievous. And he's a mischievous guy, but that's maybe the worst. It's one of them anyway. I think that's the one that contains the quote, when a master of the art of rhetoric makes a mistake that would embarrass a sophomore, then you're on to something.
great. That's a great line.
Of Machiavelli, yeah. So you're an actor. What's that about?
I was trained as an actor as a young man. In New York, when I wasn't grocery shopping in the Bronx, I was going to the Stella Adler studio in New York. And after college, I studied with a great acting teacher, Win Hanman, who had been Sandy Meisner's assistant in the 50s, trained all sorts of actors. And because I studied with him when he was 92, it means that my fellow alumni of this one teacher are guys like Win's much younger student, Frank Langella, guys who are a little longer in the tooth. And it was a great experience because I've found some people, note some superficial similarities between actors and those in politics, namely that they're vain and egotistical and liars. However, at their best, really what it should be is that both groups have a concern for the truth. An actor has to live truthfully in imaginary circumstances. That's how you get a good performance. A bad performance is some melodramatic nonsense, And politicians, too, they should have some insight into the truth of human nature and how polities work and whether man is primarily an individual or a social creature, have some insight into what makes us tick. And at best, actors and politicians should like people because you spend a lot of time with people. So, an actor should love sitting on the subway and watching the person across the way and figuring out how they move, why they move the way that they move. And same thing with a politician. If you don't like people, you're going to have a terrible existence because you're going to be spending 80% of your life at VFW hall spaghetti dinners and glad handing and kissing babies. So if you don't like that, if you're a misanthrope, get another line of work. There are other ways to make a buck and to have a successful career. So I was attracted to both of those things.
Actors appear in Shakespeare plays as actors. And to my knowledge, they're always questionable people because they're good at seeming what they're not.
Yeah.
Which is not a virtue. That's the best defense of acting I've ever heard. The one you just gave.
So, thank you. But I'm sympathetic to that view. I've been offered acting roles long since I've quit and have been in politics and political media. And I turn them down generally. And people ask me, Michael, wouldn't it be great to do this movie or do this play or something? And I've kind of taken the view that the life of an actor is really not conducive to virtue. And there is a reason that, historically speaking, actors have been lumped in with criminals and prostitutes. It's not the most virtuous profession. And speaking of that Dante professor I brought up, Giuseppe Mazzotti, he told me as a young man he wanted to be an actor. And when he mentioned this to his mother pointed to the door and told him where he could go if he wanted to do that. And I said, well, do you regret not having been an actor? And he said, no. I used to be an actor. Now I'm the real thing. I think there's a lot of beauty to the very grandiose Italian way to say it, but there's a lot of beauty to that.
Oh yeah. So I have to ask you about your parents. What'd your mom and dad do?
So my parents split when before I was conscious. So I was never conscious of them being married, but I saw my father every day. I lived with my mother. My mother was a headhunter. She was, a professional recruiter for her life. But before I was born, she worked in politics, and she had a very interesting background. She, I think, worked on the Reagan 84 campaign at a low level, and she worked for a Democrat political consultant. But sometimes this Democrat political consultant, who will remain nameless, would run Republican campaigns, I believe, under my mother's name, because Republicans needed to hire consultants too. And I remembered hearing about some of these colorful figures when I was a kid. And not long ago, I ran into Roger Stone at Mar-a-Lago, of all places. And I said, I didn't know him that well. We knew each other through Twitter, say. But I said, Roger, this is going to sound really strange, but I think you worked with my mother in the 80s. And he said, well, really? I watch your show. But that's, it's this amazing connection. And so she had that political edge to her. And I convinced her to vote for Bob Dole in 96. I was 6 years old. I was in first grade. I didn't know much, but I knew that Clinton was a draft dodger and Bob Dole was a respectable military veteran. And I pleaded with her to vote for Dole, and she let me go into the ballot box and pull the lever. So I might have been committing voter fraud since I was 6 years old, but she did that. I think she voted for Bush twice. So her political views were a little tough to pin down. And then my father has been sort of like a social worker for much of his career. Also politically very moderate, though. So I don't know where the rabid reactionary right-wingerness came out of in me, but it wasn't really from my family.
So we in the college business, one thing we learn is they make themselves more than anything else. Their loves emerge. They follow them. It's good to know about their parents because that does help you in some ways predict their behavior.
Yep.
But in the end, they're amazing, and they want to grow, and they grow in the way nature and they intend. So we think that, and so this is part of the point I wanted to make, because you are, as I've said, such an interesting combination of things, and I want to go super nerdy now. Before we started talking, you said that Thomas Aquinas had rejected the ontological argument for Christ, and I think you said that you believe it. But what the devil is that? And did he reject it?
Well, I really never want to put myself on the opposite side of Thomas Aquinas on any question, including what I should have for breakfast. That's a dangerous place to be. But when I was in school, I was an atheist from my confirmation onward, so 13 years old. This was the time of the New Atheists and Christopher Hitchens, and it was a very appealing literary movement, publishing movement for punk 13-year-old kids who thought they were smarter than they are. And so I would have called myself an atheist. And a friend of mine, freshman year, presented me with the ontological argument for God, specifically the argument that had been formulated by Alvin Plantinga, a Calvinist at a Christian university. But there have been a lot of versions of this. Leibniz and Gödel, I think, had their own version of it. It goes all the way back to St. Anselm of Canterbury. And the argument, simply put, is God is the maximally great being. He has all of the great-making characteristics and none of the corrupting characteristics. That's the major premise. The minor premise is that it's better to exist than not to exist. In other words, existence is greater making than non-existence, and therefore God exists. And that's it. That's the argument. And Bertrand Russell, the atheist of the 20th century, famously threw his tin of tobacco in the air and said the ontological argument is sound. Now, Thomas Aquinas says that it's not sound, or that might be overstating it. Thomas Aquinas doesn't like the ontological argument because it relies purely on a priori reasoning, and there's nothing empirical about it. So Aquinas loves these empirical arguments, like the cosmological argument and Aquinas' 5 ways in the Summa Theologica. However, I still think the ontological argument is sound, even if Aquinas' rejection of it basically comes down to the fact that we cannot know God's nature. We, finite creatures, cannot possibly comprehend God. So God could make the ontological argument, but we cannot. We have insufficient reason to make that argument. So he thinks other arguments are better. But this is what I always love about it. When you present the ontological argument to atheists, they say, well, I could use that argument to defend the existence of anything. I could use it to defend the existence of a unicorn. And you say, well, actually, that's not true, because only in God do essence and existence coincide. God's existence is in his essence, that is to say, his nature. And the providential aspect to this, Dr. Arnn, I was thinking about this, why it is that I love St. Thomas Aquinas. Thomas is my confirmation name, but I love this argument, the ontological argument. Is it just sentiment because that one helped get me to believe in God? And I said, no, okay, it works because God's essence and existence are together. And then I turn on your show with my friend Bishop Barron, and the first 10 or 15 minutes is on this question of God's essence and existence. And I thought, reminds me of a line from my priest in New York, who's also instrumental in my reversion. And he said, it's a wicked generation that seeks a sign and wonder, and I'm not the first to say it. But it's a stupid generation that ignores signs and wonders. So I took that as a little mark of providence as I prepared for your show.
Well, Bishop Barron I was just talking to him this very day, and he's a man of many parts. He's a remarkable man. And see, I think, so I do not object to the ontological argument. And the reason is Aristotle. And if Aristotle's on his side, bound to be Thomas Aquinas is too.
Yep.
So isn't Aristotle's argument like this, that every time you identify a thing that's part of a category, you're identifying the good in that thing. And then the next thing you see is there's different kinds of goods, and some of them are higher than others. And yet in all of them you can see some imperfection. And how would you know of the imperfection if there weren't a perfection? And so God supplies a completion to the things that you not only observe constantly, but also use every time you form a sentence. And that seems to me then that that is observation, but also it's logic. You know, how do you know this is, is an earthworm better than a horse, or is a horse better? Well, there's not much doubt about that. Oh, I didn't ask you, what gender are you?
now we're moving to the hard questions. We're talking about, and actually on that point, Aquinas would accept that argument from perfection, which is another, a lot of these arguments are really quite good. I think his favorite one is from movement. That's his preferred argument, is from the first mover. But the much harder question, Dr. Arnn, is of course what gender I am. And I'm reasonably, after 35 years on Earth, now in the middle of my life's journey, I am quite confident that I'm a man. And this might have something to do with my 3 children. I'm now convinced in my marriage with my wife, I feel confident in my manhood.
Yeah. If I watched you, my eldest child, who's a PhD, wrote a doctoral thesis on Aristotle. She knew we were doing this. She sent me you arguing with 25 LGBT people. And that thing is a riot. And she loves it. Her account of it is that you vanquished them. Now, my account of it is you didn't reach any agreement whatsoever, but you did a darn good job. What is your account of that thing?
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the compliment from your child, and I want to put that on my bio. I absolutely vanquished all of the liberals I debated. I don't know in the moment if I persuaded any of them, in part because my friend Andrew Clavin pointed this out to me some 10 years ago. It's exceedingly rare when you debate someone that your debate opponent will admit that he was wrong or that he got. Even in a private debate, forget about cameras and an audience. However, sometimes it kind of works on you. I mean, this is what happens in War and Peace when Pierre and Prince Andre are arguing over humanity and the serfs and the purpose of life. And in the moment, Pierre is begging him to accept the brotherhood of man and all this. And Andre says, no, I hate that. That's ridiculous. I'm going to only live for myself. But he quietly admitted that his opponent was right. And he started to change his life accordingly, even though he wouldn't acknowledge it publicly. And I'm kind of hoping that's what happens with at least some of the people that I was debating, some of the 24 or so.
It was mostly civil. And you get, and I don't know who put this thing on. You expressed some envy that you didn't think of the idea. But at the end, both sides got to sort of characterize how they thought it went. And you thought some of the arguments were bad. I did too. Yep. I noticed that all of them were civil.
Yeah.
I mean, one lady talked over you a lot.
Yeah.
And your skill in this, among many things, was you are quick, but also you are unfailingly civil. And so good for you.
Well, thank you. I find that that's a good thing to do in itself. And if we're all going to be grunting barbarians, I don't want any part of that anyway, even if it would make it look like I won a debate. But I think, rhetorically speaking, I think it's effective. And especially in an age when the left has so overplayed its hand and so lost the common sense and so alienated the median voter such that we now have 2 Democrat presidential candidates serving in the Republican presidential administration. Clearly, we've grabbed the center and the common sense. That I think that a little bit of grace and patience and civility goes a long way, not just as a matter of personal virtue, but I think it's very persuasive in our day and age. So I hope the left doesn't figure that out anytime soon.
Yeah, well, there's no imminent danger. So first of all, it looks to me like there's 3 issues implicit in that. And the first one is this question of God, which is just like the question, is there a reality? Because if there is a reality, you get to thinking what's high and low in it. And you'll end up thinking about there needs to be some being that's the perfection of it all. And that's how the Summa Theologica begins, by the way. Is there anything apart from reason necessary to know if there's God? And the answer is, yeah, but you can know quite a lot just by thinking about it.
Exactly. Council defines this explicitly, which is that the existence of God can be known with certainty from the created world using human reason. Now, God reveals much more of himself to us, so that can't be the end of the road. But you actually can know. And you're reminding me of a moment. I think I was in college when this happened. I was sitting out at my house in New York, and I was probably smoking a cigar, and I was looking. I had this kind of ugly little rose bush right in front of a tiny little house, and it was this kind of all broken down little rose bush. It wasn't flowering or anything. But I looked at it, and I don't want to sound soppy or sentimental here, but I had a little bit of that Joyce Kilmer poem in my head. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. Maybe not the height of English poetry, but it makes a good point. And I was struck by the specificity of the tree, or the rose bush in this case. Why does the rose bush exist? Why does it have to exist? Why does it exist as it does? In other words, why has reality unfolded in this specific way? Is there something to that? And this is a real Christian inclination, I guess, that it's not just that God exists out there in the ether, or that there is this idea of the summum bonum that's just kind of floating above it all, but that God enters into history at a specific time, in a specific political order in the Roman Empire. There are parallels, there are winks, there are resonances, that the Filius Dei enters into history at the time that the Filius Divi is sitting on the throne in Rome. All the great peace that Christ inaugurates at the time of the Pax Romana, all of these little details and hints and beautiful flourishes that is It helps us to make sense of our individuality, even as we're social creatures. It's just this totally unignorable, undeniable insistence upon the reality that we have to make sense of this world that we are actually in. We have to grapple with the problems that we're actually here for. We can't just begin with a blank slate and some bull session philosophical musings that a freshman in college might wish to advance.
Yeah, I think my own view is if you study Aristotle, one thing you learn to do is to look at each thing for what it is. Before you think about what you think about it, before you think about what caused it, you don't see the world as an infinite stream of efficient causes. Things have a being. Look at that thing right there. I'm in the college business, and one of the devices that we find handy is to tell the students that we're not very interested in your opinion. It violates all the principles of freedom and that organization fire. Yeah, but we always say, yeah, okay. if you ask an 18-year-old a fundamental question, they always want to say, well, to me, or according to someone else. And, you got to stop that, right?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what it is. And then it gets harder, see? And I think that opens up learning to them. And experience has taught me that, and also a rebellious nature. But so this, somehow you came, before you went crazy about politics, or as you were going crazy about politics, I'm not sure about the chronology, you came to be interested in the order of the beings and that they are discrete. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
And that's an odd thing for a person to be interested in.
I suppose it is, but I love the way that you're describing it, which is this impulse in modern education to only read secondary or tertiary sources, to view philosophy as just a kind of museum. And Johnny thought this, and Jack thought that, and isn't that interesting that they thought these different things? The most seriously, most modern education will take philosophy is to say, we used to think this, and then we thought this, and then we think that. So just dividing it up into eras. But no one seems to ask about quiddity. Like all that. But just, what is it? I don't really care what Johnny thought. And really, I mean, if you do go back to your primary sources and you go back to your Aristotle and especially to your Plato, then you encounter Socrates, and Socrates doesn't sound like your professor. Socrates just sounds like a guy who wants to know what things are and what it's all about.
I often say that the advantage of the classics is specifically that they were first. And that means they weren't writing about somebody else. They were just looking at the thing. The first book of history is called The History because the name wasn't taken.
That's right. The ISBN was free. They got it.
That's it. Just call it that. But so I'm gonna go into this. So you brought up Gen Z in an email to me. Who are those people, and what do you make of them?
Well, I think you have probably better insight than I do into Gen Z because you're surrounded by them all the time, and I only see them in the comments section and when I go to give speaking events. But they're the generation that follows my poor, benighted generation, the millennials, and they give me a lot of hope. And I don't think it's just hopeless, rose-colored optimism. I see a big distinction between, say, the Gen X, the latchkey kids, very cynical, very grungy, everything's just kind of base and quotidian, and they're all just going to get theirs, and they're unsupervised. And then the millennials, who, sorry to say, were spoiled and entitled, came to be known as the snowflake generation, famously shrieked at Professor Christakis at Yale, actually in 2015, one of these incidents that showed how chaotic the campuses had become. At that particular incident, the cause was that a student did not want Yale to be an intellectual place, but rather a place of comfort and home. That's her words almost verbatim. And, this is the Obama generation, all the rest. And then you get to the Zoomers. And I see with the Zoomers and Gen Z a turn away from the fashionable cynicism of Gen X, a turn away from the self-indulgence of the millennials, a turn away from, even in personal habits, a turn away from vocal fry. I've noticed this really characterized my generation. Everyone would just kind of talk like this, without supporting their words on their voice. It's all blasé, it's all nothing. It's all kind of the hipster movement. And I've noticed with Gen Z, and I've now been touring campuses long enough that I have some data points to compare them to. Gen Z strikes me as much more sincere, much more enthusiastic, almost entirely ignorant because they were raised without any firm knowledge of anything, pure skepticism being raised by Gen X. And I think that they're a driving force behind social trends that we're seeing. The return to religion, the return to more orthodox and traditional forms of religion, a dealing more with substantive goods rather than merely procedural norms. even in the way that we talk about free speech, even the way that we talk about the politics, a greater concern for the common good as a key aspect of politics, rather than merely the preservation of various procedures. I'm reading tea leaves a little bit because the Zoomers are still kind of young, but these trends have been apparent long enough now that I think that they really do constitute a pattern.
I'm trying to think. First of all, you have a different set of experiences than I, as you mentioned. I work here, and I have very intense relations with a tight community, and it's a torture chamber and an experimental lab, yeah. And our students are better than they have ever been, and that sort of raw qualifications. They got all that. But serious about it. And I don't, because my experiences here are so intense, I'm not sure what they represent. But I do know this. We had Central Hallapalooza. You must attend it sometime. It's the end of the term party. And it's a lot of fun. One year we rented an elephant. Everybody rode around on it. And I go over there. It's fun. Student bands play. Food. I got into a conversation for an hour with 3 football players. And here, if we got rid of varsity athletics, our academic standards would fall.
Yeah.
Because and these 3 big jock guys, they come up to me, and what they want to talk about is how to be a man. What I had said I teach a capstone, teach various things here. One of them is the capstone course to the seniors, and I had just taught it, and I told them that they should pick 3 books and learn them, and they should pick great books, and they should not fail to do that, whatever else they do, and that's how they keep their education alive. Well, these 3 boys, and these boys are big and strong and play Division II football. They're all starters, and they're all, he-men. And the physical thing didn't make any difference whatsoever. They want to grow, just like everything does. Every living thing wants to grow.
It's a beautiful thing, even on the notion that jocks are supposed to be dummies. Which I know some jocks who are dummies, but I know some jocks who are really smart guys too. I've never found that to be the case. And especially since we keep talking about Mr. Aristotle, it's a kind of modern idea that if you're smart, you have to have a frail body and you never take any exercise or anything. I mean, I'm not exactly going out bench pressing 250 pounds, or I was never captain of the football team myself, but there is a relation between your physical health and your intellectual health, and the 2 things don't have to be opposed. They actually, for much of history, went together.
As Bishop Barron would tell us, the soul comprises the body and other things, and what happens in one has an effect on the other. Yeah. To these 3 boys at one point, because I talked to them for an hour, they wouldn't let me go, and we're standing around with sort of pop music in the background, under a tent. And I said, look at those 2 boys over there. One of them is in the top 10 of our senior class. I happen to have just had him in class. And I said, those 2 boys are a couple of 90-pound weaklings. And I said, and then look at you 3 guys. I happen to know those 2 boys, and they're going places. You're not going to leave them in the dust. But you have, in one way. Doesn't that put you in a position to be an example to them? Because they have bodies too. And those boys, and the point is, the conversation was very intense. I couldn't go home. They wouldn't let me go, And why? Just 3 random boys walked up to me. So that's Gen Z to me. Right, that I know those kids, and it's a weird place here, but I take great heart in things that you've said about Gen Z. I believe that these differences in the generations are mostly to do with fashion. They're artificial.
Yeah.
I don't think generations are produced by their circumstances any more than I think you are produced by your parents. They're important, but they don't produce you. So I think maybe we're seeing, I mean, first of all, in politics, it looks to me like this is like the time of the American Revolution and the time of the Civil War in this way. Both of those things grew up over a long time. They were a problem, well-known, worried about, talked about. In the case of the Civil War for 40-some years, in the case of the Revolution for about 25. And then they came to a head. And I actually think that the reason they came to a head was that things were happening that couldn't go on anymore. Something's got to happen now. We got to choose one thing or the other. The house divided is about to fall. I think it's kind of like that. And I think as that becomes apparent, young people, because what's going on with them, they're all potential. They're not much actual yet. And, our seniors, I've just been a lot of time with our seniors, and they own this place. They think it's, they think they're the best ever. They think they've been wildly successful. As they leave, they want to tell me how to run it. But the next thing is very formidable to them because they never did it before. And I think there's an opportunity. This is almost Hegelian, which means it must be wrong. There's an opportunity for us to see things because of the situation we're in.
Well, consider, your story about these boys really calls my mind to the fact that when you look at the Zoomers and different inclinations, the expressions of certain loves that they're having, there are trends that pop up on social media. The trend of the trad life and the trad wife, that's kind of the new ideal. The trend of orthodoxy in religion, the resurgence of the traditional Latin Mass, specifically among younger people. And I attend the traditional Latin Mass, smells and bells and mantillas and all the rest of it. And I think, why is that happening? And I'm reminded, speaking of the great books and great writers, of Blaise Pascal, one of the great geniuses of modernity, invented the calculator. Pascal's father was educating this prodigy. It was clear he was a prodigy from age 5 or something, but he wouldn't teach him math. And Pascal, without a math education, independently discovered 32 Euclidean geometric proofs by age 12, at which point his father said, okay, I guess we got to give the kid a math education. Left to his own devices, and left to his loves and his great mind just carrying him, he discovered these realities. And for Gen Z, which was raised without much religion, for pretty much the first time in American history, people openly saying, we're not religious, the nuns are the great religious group now, we have we don't really believe in anything, raised to be told that they should just prioritize their own individual desires, raised to believe that liberty is just doing whatever you wish, not the right to do what you ought, left to its own devices. What is Gen Z rediscovering? The eternal questions and very good answers to the eternal questions. Just from the standpoint, I mentioned the traditional Latin Mass. After the Second Vatican Council, there was this major reform of the liturgy and the reorientation of the liturgy because the priest turned around. And all of these new ways to fill up the pews and bring the youths back into the church, listen to the laity, listen to what the young people want. And now the young people are finally in a position to tell us what they want. And it turns out they want the old thing. they want what has served us well for centuries and even millennia.
Well, the claim of the old thing, the highest claim, it's like if you read Aristotle or you read Thomas Aquinas or you read the Declaration of Independence, the perspective is eternal. In other words, the reason, like one of the points that came up when you were arguing with your 25-plus LGBT people was you would appeal to tradition, and that seemed to mean nothing to any of them. Mm-hmm. But then you said, and this should have been dispositive, I think, but it wasn't. Two guys can't get married and conceive a child. And that's dispositive, isn't it? And that's always
should
been
be.
so.
I felt it was, yeah.
You think so. And see, we can, by the way, probably contrive, and probably soon, so that two guys can do that.
Yeah.
But then that will be artificial. That is to say, not natural. We will have made that so, which is different than being born that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that, in other words, like here's a thing about our college. Our doctrine is mere Christianity. We were founded by Free Will Baptists. We're probably 35% Catholic or something like that. Then you got to add in us Anglicans, Orthodox Presbyterians. You know, there's a movement in the student body. I like to say the average freshman who shows up, when he prays, he says, "Oh, shucks, Jesus, I just want to say."
It's a version of St. Augustine, right? Make me chaste,
right.
but not yet.
But then they start reading old books. And the next thing you know, they're becoming all liturgical, just like you said.
Yeah.
Latin Mass, all that. Let's talk about Trump a little bit. You and I have the disgrace of supporting Donald Trump. How
It'll
could
be
we
in the
do that?
obituaries. Yeah, he
Yeah,
had
that's
the
right.
audacity.
Yeah. So what do you think he means, and where do you think all this is going?
Trump is a great political actor. And so I don't think he's a political philosopher. I don't think one has to read his books to understand his perspective. I think one learns much more from watching what he does. And I think he's got a great political gut. And I think he's very much in tune with the common sense. This actually ties in with what we were talking about on the gender ideology, which is, I remember back in 2016, Trump irritated a lot of conservatives, social conservatives, because he was asked about the gender bathrooms, an issue that he's probably never even heard of at that point. And he said, wait, what are they doing? There's a law that the men are going to the women's bathroom, and then there's another law to get the men out of the women's bathroom. He said, yes, Mr. Trump, what's your position? He said, I don't know, what were they doing before? I never heard of any problems. That seemed like, let's just go back to that. And because that wasn't a highly ideological answer, it drove some social conservatives crazy. But there's a great depth of conservatism to that answer, a kind of Burkean, Kirkian conservatism, and Aristotelian, in as much as for Trump, the paramount political virtue is prudence. And so the fact that he's not an ideologue has allowed him to create this new coalition that I don't know that either of us could have assembled that coalition, or I don't even know that I could have imagined that coalition, that you get Kennedy Democrats and crunchy hippie types and anti-war activists and all of these people, and 1 in 5 black voters and 46% of Hispanics and 40% of women under 30, and you're going to bring them all together in the new Republican Party coalition. I mean, this man alone, I think, was able to do that. And so it's worked out very well. I know people's portfolios have taken a little bit of hit with the trade wars, but Trump's done very well so far, and we'll see. I assume it'll shake out just fine. It does raise the question, though, because Trump is not ideological, what happens after Trump? There are hawks and there are doves. There are free traders. There are protectionists. There seem to be all of these opposites that are brought into the Trump wing. When that central figure, arguably a great man of history, does finally leave after his 7th or 8th term, what comes next, I don't know. I don't have a good prediction for that.
Yeah, so this is sort of my line of work. Trump is so first of all, I met Donald Trump in 2015 when he was stuck in my face. I was giving a big speech to 1,800 people, and they called me a couple of days before and said, Donald Trump's coming, and we put him on the program just before you. And he will have 18 minutes, and then you will have 30.
Famous last word.
So I get there, I didn't know much about him. Everybody knew who he was. What I knew about him, I didn't like. I thought he was a strange-looking show pony.
Right.
Developer living on debt. He talked for more than 55 minutes. 1,800 people. Oakland County Republican, Lincoln Day. My wife leaned over and said, "Larry, this is outrageous." I said, "Yeah, look around. It's pretty good."
That is outrageous. Yeah.
I thought, and then I started looking him up. And the things that I participate with him in have to do with the elimination of the Department of Education, pray it be done, and celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. He genuinely loves that thing.
Yeah.
And that is not an ideology, a principle. He wants to make America great again, which involves an act of obedience. A little bit like Lincoln, not so much like Washington. So I've come to take him seriously. I myself have no idea how all this is going to play out. It's. I think it'll take a long time. I think his 6th, 7th, and 8th terms, it will still be important who succeeds him.
Yes. No, of course. I mean, even on this point of the concreteness of Trump and the less ideological aspect to it. I mean, your point is well taken that he really loves the Declaration of Independence. He also loves big parades and he loves fireworks. And I think coming after this period when we were told America is merely an idea, it's just an idea in the abstract. It has nothing to do with concrete people or borders or oceans or land or industries or anything like that. Trump coming in there and saying, no, America is hot dogs and fireworks on the 4th of July. That is not ideological. That speaks to tradition, the unspoken customs that define a people, that you just kind of become acculturated into after some years, after some generations. I think about, despite my swarthy Italian appearance, on my father's side, my ancestors come from the Mayflower and they fought in the Revolutionary War. That's where I get the Mayflower cigar name from, is from some of them on the Mayflower. And but I had two ancestors in the Revolutionary War, John and Simon Knowles. John was the father, Simon was the son. They were at Bunker Hill. John died of his wounds after Bunker Hill. Simon went on. He fought, but he was there very early on. And then Simon was with Washington for a lot of the war. He crossed the Delaware. He was at Yorktown. He served the whole war, gets out at Newburgh in 1783, goes on, we only know about this because he got a Revolutionary War pension, that we have the document from it. But I think about my ancestors, and did they sign up at Bunker Hill because they really took to heart the writings of Montesquieu and the notion of the changing political order? And like maybe, or maybe it was just their country and they really love their country and they love their countrymen. And that political love as a political virtue, is something that has really been neglected in recent years. And so when Trump gets on stage and he cartoonishly hugs the American flag and starts kissing it, I mean, the liberals mock him for it and they sneer at him. There's something really beautiful about that. That actually, I cheer that on. I want to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, me too. I had Eric Prince on this podcast lately, The Warrior, and he gave an answer to your speculation. Who were the people at Bunker Hill? The answer is they were the ruffians. Today they'd be cops, firemen, and special forces people.
That's right.
I like to get out there and mix it up. So I want to close by talking about Christianity and politics. You're a conservative guy, started out libertarian, moved more traditional, a devout Catholic of the traditional stripe. How does all that mix together, and how does Christianity play in American politics?
Well, I'm not one for the political quietism that is sometimes advocated by Christians, that we just need to go to the hillside, keep our heads down. Politics is too yucky and mucky, and we don't want to soil our pretty little consciences with it. I don't think that's a particularly Christian view. Certainly not an Aristotelian view, and Thomas Aquinas baptized him, so we ought to take it seriously. growing up, was told that one cannot legislate morality, one of the stupidest phrases maybe ever uttered in American politics. What is legislation? What if it has no recourse to morality? What exactly are we legislating? And so I'm of the opinion that Cardinal Manning was, which is that all human conflict ultimately is theological. So to your question on the Catholicism, which is apparently foreign in America, or it's at least a minority view, I don't really buy it. I take a lot of heart with Tocqueville's observation that Catholicism will grow, that America will trend toward more traditional forms of religion, and for Tocqueville, it's specifically Catholicism, or that we'll become atheists, and that's a dreadful future that we should hopefully avoid. But even when I look at the form of the country, I see a lot of Thomas in there. I see a lot of De Regno, and I see a lot of the Summa Theologiae. Because as we all debate, is America democracy, our sacred democracy, the temples of democracy the liberals talk about? I think, well, really, the framework of the country is this mixed regime that is supposed to keep us from the awful cycle of regimes that Polybius observes, and it's going to, hopefully will avoid revolution, no matter what Thomas Jefferson writes in his diary. And so that means there's going to be a monarchical element in the president, and there's going to be an aristocratic element that we used to have more in the Senate than we have in other interests, and there's going to be a popular democratic element. And by mixing these things together, you might have some political stability. And that does come from Thomas Aquinas, mediated perhaps by other thinkers to our framers. But I think the two go together very well, a very traditional religious perspective and the country. Because much as the secularists would like to avoid it, God is on our money. God is in the little sung stanza of our national anthem, "Conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, and God is our trust." God, even for the more Enlightenment-tinged, more deistic thinkers of the Revolution, Christianity was the bulwark. Everyone quotes Adams as saying the Constitution's built for moral and religious people. Adams also said that it is the Christian morality that provided the principles on which independence was won. So that's really a more specific and concrete way of putting it. And if we cease to be a Christian nation, then I guess we'll be something else. And I warn my liberal friends, if you think Christian nationalism is bad, just wait until you see unchristian nationalism. You're going to like it even less.
Yeah, so I'm fond of the argument that America is a specifically Christian nation in this respect. Jesus claims that he is the maker of everything, the sustainer of everything, and the salvation of everything. And then he says, my kingdom is not of this world, which means somebody's going to have a kingdom.
Yeah.
That kingdom would have to respect the freedom to worship Christ. And so the regime of religious liberty is written in Christianity. And so I think you're right that, Christianity's influences in the founding are, predominant. The idea that there's a contract between God and man made with the Jews and perfected in Jesus. That's a Christian idea. And that government is a compact, is the political derivation or manifestation of that. That's Christian. Christian morality, do as you would be done by. Those are profound things. But then when George Washington writes to the Hebrew congregation as president in Newport, Rhode Island, he says, now no more that we speak of religious toleration as if it were by the indulgence of some that others enjoy their inherent natural rights. See, that too is a very Christian thing to say. And also in accord with the laws of nature and nature's God.
And present from the earliest days of the country, and so it, when we look at tradition, we understand principles of the country that are then expressed in the tradition. When you point to it, a lot on the left will they consider tradition to be prejudice and benighted and, dark and scary. But you look and you say, well, actually, we've got a pretty good track record here. So if we just kind of keep doing these things that we've got now in our bones and in our muscles, that's probably better than trying to reinvent the world anew from your reason. And it's true that will involve certain limits. Our government and our political tradition, as in all states, circumscribes certain behaviors, and the Constitution circumscribes certain behaviors. But one has to have limits. We're not limitless creatures. And then they always respond and they say, well, if you're going to say that we can do some things and not do other things, if you're going to say there are limits on license, they call it liberty, then who decides? And to your point, someone's going to decide. This is a self-government, right? I just as soon we decide in accord with the truth and with logic. And here, then, you see, with the wishy-washy language that the left uses to discuss religion, they try to say that all religions are the same. But they're certainly not. And you look at a religion like Islam, which is, since the Middle Ages, a voluntarist kind of religion. It says that Allah does whatever he wants to do. He's not identified, as Christianity identifies God, with logic, with the Logos. So as Pope Benedict in the Regensburg Address quotes Ibn Hazm, he says, if Allah wished his followers to worship idols, he could do so. That would make sense within the voluntarist structure of Islam. That would not make sense in Christianity. So in Christianity, you also have logic, and you have you can reason your way to a lot of this, certainly in political life. And it reflects nature, I guess. It's a pretty sturdy and stable way to go. And if some radical today thinks he's going to do better, he's going to shred it all up and do better from his own limited stock of reason, good luck, but I'm not signing up for that. I think we've got something too precious to conserve.
You optimistic?
I'm hopeful. I think, there's that old line about the conservative optimist and the conservative pessimist, that the difference is a conservative pessimist says things can't get any worse, and a conservative optimist says, oh, yes, they can. And I'm hopeful in the sense that hope is a demand and it's a theological virtue, and it's grounded in fact, and it's grounded in the fact of the resurrection. So I am hopeful, and in the really long term, I'm especially hopeful. In the medium term, things might get a little bit rough. But at this moment, truly, just from the purely quotidian political perspective, I have more political hope today than I've had probably in my entire life.
Yeah, me too. Winston Churchill's optimism expressed itself this way: we're going to win, for sure, but it's probably going to be hell along the way.
Do we pop the champagne yet? I don't know. Maybe not yet.
Got to work some. So I want to say thank you to the audience. I'll say Michael Knowles is at the Daily Wire, and he's all over the internet, and he's a teacher, and that's a very highly respected thing here at Hillsdale College. He's got a book club. He talks about everything under the sun, including a lot of it hilarious and a lot of it serious. And so I am very proud to have you here, and we'll talk again.
Dr. Arnn, thank you so much for having me. The honor is really all mine, and I'm just so pleased to see. You want to talk about a little bit of hope as American campuses crumble, in some cases literally under the weight of incoherence. To see what you have done at Hillsdale is a great glimmer of hope in education.
Thank you, sir.